Okay, well, once again, thank you again for joining us for this important public webinar to better understand how Ohio's election system work. My name is Nazik. I am the Policy Affairs Manager at the League of Women Voters of Ohio. And with us today, we have Michelle Wilcox, Director of the Auglaize County Board of Elections, Terry Richards, the Director of the Wood County Board of Elections, and Matt Tlechac, Senior Elections Expert at the Elections Group. The focus of our webinar today is what happens after the close of polls on Election Day. We will discuss all things ballot tabulation, recounts, audits, provisional votes, the election certification process, and more. And we will conclude by talking about the role of the voter advocate in the elections process and what you can do at the local level to ensure that elections are secure and accessible for all voters. We were supposed to start with Michelle, who is as of yet not able to join us. And so we're just going to take a small skip in the program, and I'll ask Terry if he can go ahead and start us off by talking about provisional voting.
Sure. Happy to be here today. Glad everybody could join us. Provisional voting gets a lot of myths out there. A lot of people are under the impression that either those ballots don't count or they don't count unless they're close. Pretty much that's wholly wrong. We count all the ballots that we get. Doesn't matter as long as they're valid ballots that meet all the state criteria, be it absentee, early voting. We don't wait to see if a race is close. So on the provisional process, people vote for provisional ballots for different reasons. Most of the time it's because that they didn't get their addresses updated, or maybe a change of name with marriage. And currently the new thing that's kind of a growing segment is people that don't have valid ID on election day. So that's the reasons they vote for provisional generally. There's also some other possibilities, but basically provisional voting gives us time here at the Board of Elections to check. And time in an election is the big factor. On election day, you just have to process people. And so you want to give that voter that maybe doesn't appear in the poll list, or doesn't appear with the right address, or doesn't appear with the right name, an opportunity to vote, which is what we're giving them through the provisional process. So that ballot gets put in an envelope, and then we have time after election to review those. And basically, we go through every one of those provisional envelopes and make sure that they meet the criteria of state law. Those that need to provide ID have that 4 days after election to come in and provide that to us, so we can make sure that those envelopes get checked off and are countable. And so then before our certification after an election, which is anywhere from 10 to 21 days after an election for the official count, before that certification, our board has an open meeting where they take those provisional ballots. Typically they're by category, and they vote whether to accept them or not, whether they meet state law to be acceptable or not. And then all those that are deemed to meet state law are added to the official count. And that's kind of the process that we go through from start to finish on provisional ballots. But I think the important thing to know is if you have a valid provisional ballot, if you've provided all the information and you're registered here in the state the 30 days before the election, that those are countable ballots and they're added to the official count. And in close races, that does matter.
Thank you, Terry. I want to touch on a few points and amplify a few things that you mentioned. So one of the things you said is that there's a misconception, it may be growing misconception in the public that provisional votes don't count. Do you have any sense as to why that misconception might be out there?
Well, I mean, in a sense, the easy thing would be if it's not going to matter to a race, then why go through the process? But that's not how the government and the law is set up. The law is set up for us to count every eligible ballot, whether the race was close or whether the race wasn't close. There's a lot of different races on a ballot, so you never know when something might be close or not for any given ballot. But bottom line is, we want to process voters and we want to process ballots, and whether that individual, whether that individual's vote matters in the greater scheme of people getting elected or issues being passed, it's important to that voter that we go through that process and count it if it's eligible.
And then you said, so every provisional vote, if the voter, maybe if they need to follow up, if they do what they need to do, it's going to be counted if that person is confirmed to be eligible to vote. Can you clarify what is the job of your staff at the Board of Elections in kind of counting provisional ballots or validating provisional ballots? And what is the role of the 4 members of the Board of Elections?
So the staff goes through the process of entering those provisionals into our voter registration system, seeing if they meet the criteria based on state law. There's a flow chart that the Secretary of State provides us that's based on state law that basically says, if they meet these criteria, if all this information is correct, they were registered the 30 days before in Ohio somewhere, and they provided all the necessary information. And once again, a name change that that was the previous name, etc. That those are then countable. If they're not, then our staff categorizes them into the reasons that they failed to meet that test. And so then the board's role is to actually rule on all those ballots, be it the ones that meet all the state criteria, then the board, typically will rule that those are countable ballots. If they didn't meet the state criteria, then by category, for instance, they weren't registered anywhere in Ohio the 30 days before. That's the biggest category out there. They did not come in after Election Day and provide their ID. They voted in the wrong location. That also is an issue. So for whatever the reason is, the board votes on those, and that's held in a public forum, public meeting that anyone can watch.
So one of the biggest questions we get about provisional ballots is if somebody shows up to vote on Election Day, they don't have a photo ID and they vote a provisional ballot. If they somehow manage to get to the BMV and get an ID, get the interim ID, obviously they're not going to get the actual card, right, in the 4 days. But if they get the interim ID after Election Day, can they use that, even though it was issued after Election Day, can they use that to validate their provisional vote?
What state law is, to my understanding, is that if they have that 4-day window and we get to see a valid ID in that 4-day window, that we will go ahead and mark that as shown a valid ID.
Great, thank you so much. And to our audience, if anybody has any additional questions about provisional voting, please go ahead and place them in the Q&A section. So Terry, I'm going to completely place you on the spot here. And since Michelle was not able to join us, unfortunately, today, I'd like to take a step back and ask if you might be able to step into her spot and talk a little bit about how ballots are counted. So starting with absentee ballots, which make up early vote ballots, as well. So early in-person voting, as well as mail-in voting. And then you have Election Day ballots. How are those votes counted in Ohio?
So what happens with absentees are basically counted first. Those are the first ballots available. Up to 10 days before an election day, we can start opening mail absentees, preparing those to be counted, run some through our scanners, depending on the volume. It depends on the volume, depends on the county, how they go through that process. But basically, before 7:30 on election night, all the absentee mail and all the early votes have to be entered into your system. Boards do not have reporting function at that time. They do not know how those people voted. They don't know, what the results are up until 7:30 in election. All those ballots and early votes are in our system. And then at 7:30, the first results that people see either on their county website or at the state level are the absentee and early votes. And so that's the first process. Then through election night, what you're seeing is the precinct level results. So election day precinct results are brought back to the boards of elections. Once again, depending on county and depending on system, it varies a little, but the basic premise is that we then get all the results that are entered into our tabulator. And then through election night, as we get results or as we get locations delivered, then we provide periodic updates. Until then, when you get to the end of the night, maybe 10, 10:30, hopefully not later for too many people, then you have 100% of both election day and absentee results.
So just to clarify, take a step back. You said that the ballots or absentee ballots are entered into the system. And there's, 29 days or so of early voting. People go into their county board of elections or an early vote center. They vote on a machine, but those votes are entered into a system, but they're not being compiled, is what you're saying? Like you have no ability to kind of read what is the total. Am I understanding that correctly?
Correct. Yeah. What you want to do is you want to get those ballots into your tabulation system, but we are prohibited by state law from printing any sort of reports to know what the totals of those ballots are. So the first time that we see aggregated totals are after 7:30 when the last of those early votes or absentee votes are added in, because we have drop boxes out there here in Ohio, and so we check those drop boxes at 7:30, and many times there are a couple ballots or a few ballots depending on the election in there that have to be added in. So about 7:45 maybe for most counties, maybe a little later depending. You'll get those first results of all the absentee mail that came in through 7:30, as well as those early votes.
And then election nerds like myself, by the next morning, are checking for the initial report that the county puts out on election results. Can you talk to me a little bit about how does that work? What does your evening look like on election night, in terms of you're getting all the votes, you're tabulating them? How do you know when, all right, it's time for me to compile that initial election night results?
So pretty much after 7:30, we immediately go to that drop box, which is pretty much the only outstanding ballots at that point, because now early voting ends on Sunday. So those results have been entered into our system. So and we keep up with our mailed in ballots. Pretty much most counties keep up with those, getting those scanned in to their systems as soon as they're eligible, just because, once again, we don't want to get caught at the end having a bunch of ballots that we need to get on. So we go to that drop box, we get whatever remaining ballots are there, we add those in, and once again, we're supposed to ideally report up to the state in that first 15-minute window after 7:30 what our early and absentee results are. Then for most counties like ourselves, it becomes a waiting game, because your polls closed at 7:30, but they're still doing their paperwork. They're still going through their process of closing up the polls. And so here at the Board of Elections, we're kind of waiting for those first precincts to finish their process and drive their results information to us, where we unload it outside. We go through a verification process to make sure that we have all their reporting requirements, and then we add that into our tabulation system. And so periodically through the night, we will do updated reports, and different counties have different schedules. We have to report to the state on certain schedules, and typically we will release local results onto our website at the same time, because at the time you kind of have to pause to do those results for both the state and for your local, you have to pause a moment in tabulating to get that picture in time, and then we do that report and we run for a little while. And once again, most counties between maybe 8:45 and 10 o'clock are getting a lot of volume come in. And so then reports change very quickly in that middle part of the evening.
And Matt is a senior elections expert with the elections group and studies this kind of thing on a national level. So he's gonna talk to us all about audits. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you, Nazik. I appreciate the opportunity to share. And for all of you listening, I appreciate your desire to learn more about just elections in general. I know that the term elections geek is probably for all of us that are presenting today, but certainly we want more of you, because the voices that we carry and the truth that we speak will help just us in general. And specifically, Terry and Michelle, I know as election officials in the state of Ohio, they're just highly regarded in all that they do in the state. And I know that they are leaders, but they need support. And Terry and Michelle, I know Michelle's not on right now, but I just appreciate you folks. And for those of you who are listening today, who are poll workers, we appreciate you as well. And what you do is just essential to democracy, as you know, and that's why you do it. So thank you for the opportunity to speak briefly on audits. You know, sometimes the term audits can carry a negative connotation, just because when I think of an audit, I think of the IRS auditing me. However, you know, an audit is typically just viewed as an inspection, right? So if you go to the service center to get new tires on your car and they're done servicing it, normal inspection protocol tells the service technician to go with a regular, you know, hand crank lug nut wrench and tighten the lug nuts on your car to make sure that they are on there correct. And I think all of us looking at that and seeing that happen are thankful that somebody's double checking to make sure the wheels on our car don't fall off as we drive down the road. So an audit from an elections perspective is very similar. We're double checking. We're making sure that it is correct. And so we look at the nature of audits in the nation, and all over, the audit practices have taken on more steam. More states are adopting these practices. And I think all but 6 states right now are using a form of audit, which we refer to as a tabulation audit. So Terry just outlined kind of the certification process. After the certification is complete by a board of elections, they then go into a period of time as they wait to do the audit of the election results. So the audit typically is there to detect voting system errors, whether that be done by humans, perhaps maybe some ballots were not properly scanned, or maybe it's a misconfiguration in how the ballot was programmed or how the voting system was programmed. The audit process, the tabulation audit, provides that accountability to voters to show that what we said were the results of an election are actually those results. And an audit also helps to deter that fraudulent activity. If folks know that their possible insider action that's negative could cause or could ultimately be reported or detected, hopefully that's going to deter those types of activities from occurring. The audit process also assures us that the votes were issued, counted, and reported accurately. And the audit itself provides feedbacks for process improvement, whether that's organization of your election equipment or your ballots. All of those types of things are an opportunity for process improvement for local election officials. I will say that the audit typically happens after the certification, but I think it's very important that we understand that election officials do much more than just audit after the fact. There are a series of significant steps that election officials like Terry, Burton, and Wood County take to ensure that the chain of custody of its ballots and voting equipment is accounted for, that every time they move or go to a polling location, that their sign off there's a bipartisan function of election officials in every step of the process, ensuring that the results are going to be secure even before we do an audit. We also have things like ballot proofing and testing of voting equipment that must happen before each election. And of course, there's this reconciliation process. This is the balancing to ensure that the number of ballots cast equal the number of voters that participated in each election. And all of those core functions really underpin the audit process and happen before a tabulation audit actually occurs. So let's just quickly touch on a variety of post-election tabulation audits. And really, I just want to focus on the two of them. The vast majority of states, again, perform these post-election tabulation audits of their voting equipment. And they do that by looking at the voter verifiable paper audit trail. And that's the paper ballots or the paper record that is generated by a ballot marking device or a DRE. A DRE is a direct recording electronic device used in some states where an individual typically will mark their ballot, and then a generated record of what they cast or what choices they made is then generated, and that's what's audited. Close contests may also result in a recount of ballots. So keep that in mind, that a recount, if the election is close in a specific contest, a recount's going to occur prior to or in lieu of the post-election audit. Audits can be performed before certification or after certification, but in Ohio, they do occur after the certification. So there's two different types of post-election tabulation audits that I want to cover. One is the traditional fixed percentage audit. So this is where you predetermine a percentage of the ballots that are randomly selected, and then you hand tally the results for each of those ballots. Typically, a variety of contests, maybe 3 contests, are selected as part of the audit. So once the hand tally of those 3 contests is done, you then compare the results of that to the actual machine count, which would be the tabulated result that Terry spoke of that were part of the certification process. So a percentage could vary. It could be 5%, 10%. It just is determined typically by either state law or by policy that's enacted by an election official. The audit units are typically the precincts or maybe a congressional district or another district, or maybe the audit units is a variety of different machines that are chosen. Again, at random and not pre-selected before the audit begins. So the audit's happening and the election officials therefore are using equipment that they didn't know necessarily was going to be audited, or using a set of ballots that they didn't know were going to be part of the audit. So the hand tally results, again, for each audit unit selected are then compared to the voting system results that are a part of that certification process. So thinking in that term, that's happening after the certification process itself. The other type of audit that's talked about a lot, you may have heard about it, is what's called a risk limiting audit. It's similar in theory to a fixed percentage audit, except that the initial sample size will vary based on the margin of victory for the audited contest and the total number of ballots cast. It typically uses a program or a formula to generate the calculations so that the election officials know what units or ballots and batches and the number in each batch or ballot selection are actually to be audited. So the audit's designed to increase in scale, meaning you do more auditing of more ballots and even escalate to a full hand count, depending on the discrepancies discovered within that audit. So that's kind of just a quick outline of, a tabulation audit. Just keep in mind that on their own, audits don't identify if there are more ballots counted than voters given credit for voting. Again, that's part of the process that's done by election officials within the umbrella of reconciliation. It doesn't identify unscanned or detected ballots, or deleted ballots. Those things would need to be done through that reconciliation process. It doesn't identify ineligible or fraudulent voters, and it doesn't identify breaks in chain of custody. So those other security components are done throughout the process by election officials. And the post-election tabulation audit really looks at comparing what is seen as through the hand count of the ballots compared to the voting system to detect any inaccuracies in that. So that's just kind of a quick rundown on tabulation audits. Of course, there is a lot of work being done right now in looking at what other processes within the election environment could be audited to help strengthen even more and open up the accountability and the transparency that we all want in the election process. So hopefully that kind of covers that a little bit, and I'll pass it on to you, Nazak.
Thank you so much, Matt. And I want to thank you for, excuse me, for correcting, because I misstated that certifications are done, that audits are done before certifications. I misspoke. In Ohio, they are indeed done afterwards. So I want to turn back to you, Terry, for a second, taking everything that Matt said. And Matt is from Ohio, although his group works on the national level. So he's very familiar with Ohio law and how audits are operated in Ohio. But from your perspective as a BOE director, can you tell me how all of this plays out for you? What is the usefulness for an audit? What role does it play in kind of like the overall process of elections from start to finish?
Yeah, I guess I would definitely echo some of the points that Matt made. If you, because of the way Ohio is structured with the pre-election testing, with the process that you go through with early voting, and then after the election, the reconciliation process, I would say, at least in our county, 100% of the time, if there's a problem before you get to the audit. Now, that may, depending on, other people's processes, hopefully that's true everywhere, but, I can't speak for everywhere. I can speak from my perspective. We like the audit because it's, once again, it's a verification. It's a public verification because the audit is open to the public. It's a public verification that our tabulating system works. We do run a DRE system here in Wood County. So we're using an electronic vote that then is put onto what essentially is like a receipt tape. And we go through that paper process. And I mean, I know I go, to bed sleeping easier every time we finish an audit and it proves out that everything was counted correctly. Because I mean, we go through the process of testing, we go through the process on election day. But you do want to prove out if there are any problems or flaws in the system. And so from a board standpoint, recounts and audits really are essentially the same process. And we work off a percentage basis here in Wood County. Ohio allows for risk limiting audits or percentage based. It's kind of what your comfort level is. It also depends on your size. Larger entities like the risk limiting audits because it allows them to accomplish the same function, but maybe with fewer ballots than a percentage would be for them. For us, the percentage is a fairly doable process. And so, it's another tool in a bunch of tools here in Ohio to make sure that the process is secure and works correctly.
Thank you so much, Terry and Michelle. I'm glad you were able to join us. I don't know what happened, but I'm sorry for any kind of technical errors that might have happened on my part, but I'm glad you were able to join us.
Not only that, but I apologize as well. When we run an office of our size, we just have our bipartisan team, 2 people, and we thought, oh, we can do that today.
Going all over the place here because I want to make sure we make space for the obstacles that the boards of elections have really had to endure through the last 2 years. But still, there are all these processes in place to make sure that our elections are indeed safe and secure. One of them being that everything in Ohio from start to finish is done in a bipartisan manner, right? Whether we are talking about, some of the minute things like, people, when you check in at the boards of elections, there is a Republican and a Democrat there.
Mhm.
When you check in at a polling place, when there is curbside voting, a Republican and a Democrat will administer your vote to you. Can you, Michelle, talk a little bit about some of the post-election day processes or even the pre-election day processes that contribute to election security in a bipartisan manner?
Yes. Well, if this isn't a perfect example of that for absentee balloting, contingency plans and the bipartisan team that you have to have while conducting your early in person. So when somebody calls in sick and it's just the Republican and the Democrat, and we're touching the ballots and we're issuing the absentee early in person ballots, it's just our team. So that's a great example of that today, when it was both Luke and I out there, a Democrat and a Republican, being able to do that. So that was a good example of, oops, I have to take care of this before we can do anything else. So again, during absentee voting, wherever there are ballots, it has to be both a Democrat and a Republican. When we go to the drop box to get the ballots off, when someone drops one off, we both look at it. We both see that the signature verification, that the signatures match. So there are things you have to do as a team that you have to keep on doing. So when you need these contingency plans, you have to think, oh, I have to get somebody on the phone. You wouldn't believe it, but a lot of times we'll go down to the Treasurer's Department and get the Republican and have her go to the drop box with me. And again, that's all recorded. So a part of the absentee process is, again, making sure that anytime a ballot prints up the ballotar, or you're handing one to a voter or checking signatures, it's done in a bipartisan team and secure. So again, like I said, today was a great example of that, where I just couldn't get away. Sometimes election officials, I know in a small office, feel they can't even go to the restroom. A lot of times we'll eat at our desk and such and just keep that team going. And because you mentioned the extra elections, we have used a lot of our money, and now we have to go to the commissioners to ask for more. So when we think we can handle something, we start reducing here to save cost. And this was a prime example of when it didn't work. So again, the security for that, it's our utmost importance. So for the absentee, like I said, during absentee voting and checking signatures, even applications, having all that secure, having everything locked with our bipartisan locks. Post-election then, when at nighttime after, so again, when everything goes out to the voting locations, we even have a DNR send the equipment together. We have chain of custody forms that are very, very important. And everybody signs for that. And I know Matt talked about audits, and I don't know if a lot of the viewers realize that when you do an audit, that you have to have that whole chain of custody. You have to see that the equipment was dropped off here, that the ballots were picked up or sent with this equipment, and that the poll worker signed for that. So when you have an audit, you have a whole stack of all the sequence of anybody that may have touched that and any trouble sheets. So you have to keep all that in order when, so not only is it delivered like that, but also when it comes back, a bipartisan team has to bring back the ballots and the equipment. And then that is signed for once they get to the office. And also then when Luke and I, both of us are in the tabulator room, and I don't know if everybody knows, but different equipment works different. We have election media on USB sticks. So we have a rover And if, depending on what political party he is, they will go and stop at a certain amount of polling locations, and a bipartisan team pick up the media, bring it into our office, and then a bipartisan team checks it in. Then Luke and I will read that stick into our electionware. And again, that stick, what's on that USB, never changes. If there is a human error of maybe a provisional ballot went through the machine that shouldn't have, then we have them document all that. So what is on that election media is not going to change. We tell a lot of our poll workers, don't spend hours and hours if a ballot accounting sheet may come up one off, because that amount is never going to change. Clearly then, though, when we do have those audits, we reconciliate all of that paperwork for that post-election. So again, everything from receiving the ballots in to they're in double locked cupboards. Again, the ballots go into cupboards that have a D and an R. We can't process any of the provisionals or anything without that bipartisan team, and the equipment that is again, checked in and then locked again. We have a cage, an equipment room, all locked in then by a bipartisan team. So those are just a few of the absentee and then also post-election that processes that all boards of elections go through, maybe from even as big as Cuyahoga to as small as Auglaize, which is 32,000 people. And again, you still need enough staff to be able to do that bipartisanly, whether it's election night or even, again, during your absentee voting period.
Thank you, Michelle. I have lots of questions actually, but I have one thing I want to ask both Terry and Michelle before we move on, to make sure that some of the questions from the audience is passed. And I'll start with Terry. Terry, what does it mean for an election to be certified? We always hear the election was certified. What in the context of everything that we've spoken about today, what does that mean exactly?
So to some degree, it's the end of our election process, setting the audit aside. The audit's a double check. But a certified election is when you take all the ballots that were counted on election day, you take all the eligible ballots that have come in the meantime or been ruled eligible. So absentees have a window if they were mailed the Monday before election to come in. They also have all those provisional ballots that we said the board rules on in a separate meetings. Sometimes it's the same meeting, depends once again on county size. So basically you go through the process of counting again. You take the unofficial ballots, count those, you add in the eligible absentees, you add in the eligible provisionals, and then you get a final official count. And so really, that process, like I said, happens anywhere from 10 to 21 days after election. And that's the final results. And so then your board has a meeting where they not only are in on that process, but then they certify that those results are the official final results for the county that are then sent up to the state.
Okay. And then Michelle, let's say in a statewide election, county by county, this is happening on a, not necessarily all on the same day. They do it, based on county size, how many votes they have, how many meetings they need. On the statewide level, then how does that work when there's a statewide election? So for example, this election, we're going to have mostly county races and local races. But we also have two statewide issues. So what role does the state play in that?
So then we have deadlines then that we need to send in once our board signs off, and we send our final certification into the state, and then they take all those certifications from each county, and then they actually certify it statewide.
Great. I'm going to move now to some questions from our audience. The first one is, can you please address any concerns regarding voter fraud There's been elevated concern about this based on what she believes is zero proof, but has that changed? And just to add a little bit of context, many Ohioans have been very concerned about Ohio pulling out of ERIC. Are there elevated concerns about voter fraud now that Ohio has pulled out of ERIC? I'm going to actually let Matt start with this one on his kind of perspective, being outside of the official election system, on his view of that.
Well, you gave me the easy question, right? So I don't want to speak on behalf of the Ohio Secretary of State's office in any way, but I will say that voter fraud is obviously something that should be concerning. Is it a huge concern? I think that's open to some debate and depends on the perspective you come from. But I want to just underpin again the security that's involved in every step of the election process. And really looking back at the very fabric of it is down to the voter registration process. And that's a process that we have a lot of defined goals and duties that local election officials have to play each year to help ensure that the lists are accurate, that they're up to date, that individuals are at the address where they now live, to prevent, to Terry's point, an excess of provisional ballots. Because if people are voting where they're voting, there'll be less provisional ballots. So I think those are all important things that are happening right now in the state, and have happened even prior to joining ERIC. I think tools like ERIC do help states to gather data. I think there's other perspectives that people have in how to get that data now, and I think those are things that we'll see more down the road potentially. But I will say again, just to underpin what's already been done, those processes have been in place in Ohio law for some time. They are continuing, and I think it's something that we want to be aware of. But is it something that is alarming? I would suggest that we be careful about that, because I think that looking at the evidence, it probably doesn't raise to that level of concern. However, it's something we want to be vigilant about as we secure our democracy.
Thank you. Terry, do you want to say anything about that?
I'm happy that Matt went first, is what I'd like to say. I guess what I would say is, in Wood County, I do not see a large issue with voter fraud. I would also agree with Matt's statement that we have to be vigilant about it. And I guess I feel fairly confident that our processes within the bounds of Ohio law allow us to try to be at the forefront of identifying any concerns. As we get voter registration cards in, if we have concerns, there's processes that we can go through to verify that. We do everything that we can to, once again, in the bounds of what we're allowed to keep our databases as clean as possible, because that's certainly voter fraud is not anything that we want to happen either. But we also want to make sure that we count every eligible voter's ballot. And so, you have that constant balancing act of making sure that your lists are clean and that all the people that are eligible on that list have the opportunity to vote.
Thank you. Michelle, did you want to add anything to that?
I can add to it. Mine will be on a little bit of a different. Yes, we keep our voter rolls clean, and but once maybe one of those rare incidences that something, rest assured that I've had one case since I've been here 10 years, and it's actually when it was a poll worker error, where in the poll book they tapped the son's name instead of the dad's name, and then ERIC did find that out in Washington State, and then the son had voted out there, was in the military. And again, then rest be that any of these cases, rather rare or are all very, like I said, taken care of security wise, then they, will go to the prosecutor, and then the prosecutor will look at that by case and see that if it's actually prosecutable. So that's always nice too, that you can have that. And that, they'll say, oh, this was an elderly lady that, went to one polling location, think it didn't count, and if it's prosecutable. So that's always great to have that as well as the backup.
Thank you. So another question about the Election Integrity Office that was established by the Secretary of State LaRose. So the question here is who can submit concerns, but let's take a step back. Michelle, can you tell me what is the Election Integrity Office? What is the role? And then you can talk about what is the purpose? Who can submit concerns to that? What kind of concerns?
The integrity elections has been put in place. Like, let's say that I get 3 absentee applications and it looks like the signatures that somebody signed for all 3. So that's the case where they'll help. You can call them, you can, give them the information and such, so that they will review that. Or they're in place now. So even though something may have happened, a couple years ago, they may review that and call about that happened in the state of Washington. And then we can say, yes, we've double checked that. The prosecutors decided that that's not prosecutable and such like that. So it's actually, they're there to help.
Thank you. So the Election Integrity Office is a thing. It already exists, but I know that Senator Gavarone has a bill in committee that would codify the Election Integrity Office. Do you have any kind of idea as to what would be the purpose of that? How would the Election Integrity Office be changed or strengthened by that bill? I'm sorry, I know that that's not something that we prepared, talked about in preparing for this. So if you're able to comment on that, that would be great.
Is that back to me?
Yes, either one of you, Michelle or Terry, if you're familiar with the bill.
I'm not really familiar with the bill, but I wouldn't see a reason to codify it. I don't know that it needs to be in law.
Terry, are you familiar with the bill at all? And can you speak to whether this bill would change the function of the Election Integrity Office?
I am not familiar with the bill. The only thing that I will say is that Michelle and I both have a lot on our plate running elections, and to manage the election process and the details involved and the level of detail that you need to be at all the time, the way you need to be engaged in the process to make sure that we run the election smoothly, makes any entity, be it a prosecutor or help from the state, that can do more of an investigation nature, really helps us, because we do not have the resources nor the expertise to be criminal investigators. And so anytime that we are able to pass that on, like Michelle said, to our county prosecutor, we can have questions, we can have concerns, and it's certainly valid and appropriate for us to raise those. And so whether those are raised through our prosecutor or the integrity division, anyone that can provide us help in doing the legwork and the research to find out what needs, what parts of actions end up being voter fraud and what parts are just accidents or things that unintended consequences. And so I guess I don't know where the bill would put that, but any assistance that we can get to help track that stuff down without us having to be immediately and actively involved in that process, I think is a good thing for elections officials.
Thank you. And let's end off with this. Michelle, can you talk about the voter advocate's role on the local level in helping to make sure that elections are secure and accessible for all?
Mm-hmm. I like to talk about, let's say maybe I will go to the Rotary and speak, or we have the young professionals come here and tour the office. And I always tell them, once they come in and we, talk about all the processes, that they are then the educators, that they're the ones then that can go out to constituents and tell them all about, hey, I was at the Board of Election and they have 2 locks on their doors. The same as being a poll worker. A lot of them we encourage to be poll workers when they come in and they have questions. So again, it's just about educating the educators so then that they can go out and then spread the word. Public test, I'm getting ready for that tomorrow. So again, you have to publish the public test. You have to, put a notice up and encourage anybody to come and watch that and to actually see the board going through the processes and practicing those security measures that you've learned. So that's a good way for advocacy groups to go ahead and spread the word. And like I said, continue to do outreach. And, whether you're at the fair doing a veterans, type of, a mock election, go through those processes exactly how you would an election at the office or out at a polling location with your chain of custody forms and such. And when they see the locks on the front of the machines. So again, it's all about education and inviting those groups in so that then they spread the word and then they become interested and they become to your processes.
Thank you. Terry, same question for you. What do you feel is the role of a voter advocate on the local level in helping to make sure that elections are secure and accessible for every Ohio voter?
I mean, Michelle covered it really well. It's about, I guess, getting involved in the process. The more people that we can have involved in the process as a poll worker, working an early vote center, or just attending a public test or something like that, educates them on the process. And Michelle hit it dead on. I mean, we need people out there telling the truth about what this process is. There's a whole bunch of people out there spreading things that aren't true. There's a whole bunch of people that have agendas in what they want to say is true. And so I think the more that we can get people just stating the facts, you don't have to argue, you don't have to, involve yourself in some of the personal things that are happening out there, but to just spread the truth about how elections work, how they are bipartisan, how we do work through to catch fraud, how we work together to ensure votes are counted. And the more people that we can get on board, at least drowning out some of those voices that are just out there saying things that are based on nothing.
Yeah, thank you for that. And if I may add to that, while I don't want to speak on your behalf, there has been a proliferation over the last 2 to 3 years of misinformation and disinformation, and some of it starting from targeted, intentional campaigns, and other people, unfortunately, just grabbing onto these sensational accusations and stories about how boards of elections operate or don't operate, for that matter, and causing, and this is why we're here today, right? Causing a lack of trust in our elections systems. And our government can't function if people don't trust our election system. So the purpose of today is so that people are reassured and know and are educated and understand that virtually every process of our election system is open and public and transparent, and that there are so many safeties in place to make sure that if something goes wrong, we immediately catch it, we immediately fix it. Thank you. Matt, do you want to add to that from your perspective? Do you feel like there is anything additional that voter advocates can do to ensure that elections are accessible and safe for everyone?
Well, I'll just say the 2 individuals that you had the pleasure of listening to today spill blood, sweat, and tears because they believe in this process. and they're confident that they're doing the best job possible for the voters. And as an election official, as a former election official, the number one goal for me is for folks to have confidence in the elections and to engage in the process. And that's what we want to continue to see. And I hope this information that was shared today helps just stabilize that confidence that many of you already have. But again, to Michelle's point, our ambassadors to share that with folks that are out there that may not know as much as us. So thank you for the time today.
Thank you for that. And I want to conclude by saying this. I'd like to add something that I feel like people can do, and it's to hold their statewide elected officials accountable. By when we see misinformation and disinformation not being refuted by our elected officials, I feel like we need to step up and we need to say, you need to take an active role in refuting misinformation. If that's not happening at the top, then I feel like there's a lack of trust and responsibility on the part of those elected officials, because they can do. I think that they can do a lot to refute all this kind of again, like proliferation of misinformation about our election system. Well, thank you to all of you again for joining us, our participants and our speakers, for taking out of your day when I know that this is a exceptionally busy time. I have benefited a lot. I know that everybody else has benefited a lot. And this will certainly be, is being recorded and will be up on our YouTube page within about 24 hours. Thank you everyone so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.